Okay, we'll get started. Welcome to this month's Top Step webinar. Our topic for today are some best practices around timesheets. Okay, what we're going to talk about today is some general timesheet setup and reporting. We'll talk about how you can use your timesheet system to capture additional data, the time entry tab, some features and functions that you can set up for timesheet behavior, and then some common scripting solutions we've run into over the last year plus. And then we'll talk lastly about timesheet corrections. So timesheet rules, something we always cover with customers as we think about how to set timesheets up. This allows you to enforce your business rules on your end users. Common example is, we're not going to allow anyone to enter more than 24 hours in a given day, or we want to require all of our users to put minimum work schedule hours on their timesheet. So if they're, example, 40-hour week expected to work, there's a setting to enforce that 40 hours a week. And then you have the options to require or error or to warn if someone doesn't follow the rules. So there's a lot of different options there for setting it up. The one thing to remember or note is it is a global setting, so it will affect everyone entering time. So it cannot be enabled for a subset of users. So just be aware of that. And if you are setting up enforcing a number of hours, minimum, max, make sure you use a percentage. So versus a hard-coded number of hours, in case you have users on a work schedule that are less than 40 hours in some scenarios. So percentage is generally what we recommend. From a timesheet periods perspective, OpenAir has lots of different options. You can enable, weekly is what we see most common. We've seen semi-monthly as well. Bi-weekly is another option. And generally those are set at a global level and enforced on all users. One thing to note, there is a setting that allows you to vary timesheet reports, reporting periods by user. So I had one customer that went down this path, but decided against it, where they had a group, they had acquired a company that do weekly billing, but they were on a semi-monthly timesheet period. So we evaluated and looked at, enabling the acquired company to allow to do weekly, but everyone else could do semi-monthly. Ultimately, they determined to move the entire company to weekly, which is what they ultimately decided, but it is a possibility out there. So alerts, timesheet alerts are something we see a lot of customers benefiting from. Reminders, your timesheet is due, you have a timesheet approval to take action on. You can send those out, weekly or whatever period makes sense. We see multiple alerts as well. For reminders that time is coming due, and a reminder to get your time in. Also to as escalating in the potentially in the messaging as you get past the due date for time entry. So it can help you kind of remind and message your end users to get their time in on time. And then obviously there's also alerts for overdue approvals. So as you have different approval processes, you want to get those submitted timesheets approved as well. So those alerts are available. And then lastly, in the advanced reporting module, there are a couple of reports that are basically for monitoring the time process. Timesheet status is our most common, and this one you can set this up by manager, and you can report on which timesheets are missing, which timesheets are open and submitted, and if they're submitted, who is the next approver to approve them. So very beneficial report for managing the timesheet process and hopefully getting your timesheet discipline under wraps. One thing to note about timesheet alerts that I didn't mention, we often see where, especially in global organizations, where we need timesheet alerts to fire off for different organizations in different countries, different time zones. And so one of the ways we've been able to achieve that is by using departments to represent different countries. And that allows you to filter by department in the timesheet alerts. So if you've got UK folks with a different timesheet due date or due time, then we can set alerts for the UK versus alerts for the US, and allows you to use the department as your filter. So it can be very handy, again, for global organizations that might have varying timesheet due dates. Oftentimes, customers are looking to capture additional data on the time entry process. There's a number of examples where we've run into this. I would say payroll type is one of those fields that is available to add to the timesheet, and you can pretty much use it for whatever you need to. What we most commonly see payroll type used for is capturing geographic locations where work is being done. And so you could rename payroll type to work location is common, and you can have different values for different states, different regions, countries, et cetera. And we often see this as for computing income taxes for companies that are sending their consultants off to other states for long periods of time. There will be potentially some income tax responsibilities, and being able to report on how much time did we spend in these other states to determine whether a tax is owed or not is a common reporting requirement. So using payroll type that's one way to be able to add additional dimension to the timesheet and be able to capture that and report on time entries. You could subtotal in summary reports and standard timesheet reports. Time type is another optional field. This one, the benefit of this one is it does, in a time billing rule, you can filter by time type, whereas in payroll type, you cannot. So by using time type, you could potentially use that for determining if it's billable or non-billable. Now, generally, we don't recommend in users putting billable, non-billable, that we generally try to steer the task to determine if it's billable or non-billable. But we often also see where they need to be able to enter non-billable hours against billable tasks and vice versa. And so with this, you can then pick the project, pick the task, determine if it's billable or non-billable. And then in the billing rules, you can use billable as a filter in the billing rules. And so that's a common use case for using time type. The other thing about time type that you can do is you can enable a setting that allows you to filter which projects are allowed to show which time types. So for example, if you've got time types of billable, non-billable, or maybe you have additional like sales time or bench time, but you don't want those to be available for client projects. So you can enable that filter that allows you to say only billable, non-billable are allowed when this project is selected. And so that's an option. And we also see this also for overtime tracking. So end users being able to enter, if they enter over 40 hours, they can then code their additional hours to overtime, and then being able to report on different hours, but also use billing rules. If you're doing any sort of overtime billing at an advanced rate, you can use your billing rules to filter by the time type of overtime with a new billing rate card. So time types are very flexible. You can also use them in filter sets as well. So you can subtotal by them in summary reports and define those on a project basis. So very flexible option. Time entry tab is one of those that I think flies under the radar. I think it's everybody who's been deployed in OpenAir in the last couple of years, it's an automatic enabled setting. For some older OpenAir users, you may not have this turned on, but for me, it was a game changer when it first got introduced many years ago, because it does allow you to now go and, without having to go run a report, you can simply go into the timesheet module and drill down into the time entries details. And so you can filter by customer, by date, by user, by all sorts of, by time type, by service as well. So all the different standard fields are available in the time entries. And you can set up advanced filters to look for date ranges. And so it's a very quick way to be able to quickly say, how much time was spent on this project by this user, questions that normally you'd have to go to a report for. Whereas here you can just drill in. So it does have to be enabled at the role level for users to have access to the time entries feature. And it was enhanced a bit in the April 2021 release. They allowed service to be an available value in the list, and everyone was auto-enabled there. So if you were looking for the service that the time entry is on, then you can see that as well. So time entry tabs can be really, really powerful. You can also use them for, I use them for paying some subcontractors and marking those as paid and tracking which time entries have been paid, which time entries have not been paid. And so it's another way to use time entries. Timesheet population. So there's a bunch of options in OpenAir. We really need to think through those as we're going down the configuration process. But you can allow users to auto-populate their hours and or their notes from bookings. That's an option. Again, it is a global option. So if everyone has bookings in the system, they go to create a timesheet for that week, you could have the bookings feed the timesheet with projects and customers and hours. The beware here is you want, if the accuracy is not there in the bookings and people are not making changes after the timesheet is created, then you could end up with inaccurate time entries. You can also auto-populate your approved time off requests or schedule requests. Once those get approved and you go to create a timesheet for the week you had requested time off, you get that auto-population as part of that process, which is a nice feature. And lastly, timesheet clone feature. I think everyone probably benefits from the cloning of creating a new timesheet for this week, but cloning last week's timesheet. Generally, we recommend clearing the hours. So you start with a timesheet that's got all the pre-populated projects and customers, but you are entering fresh hours into the timesheet. There is the option to copy the hours from the previous timesheet, and then you can update those hours as they change week to week. So again, there's a lot of different options. The one thing I'll say about populating hours from a previous timesheet or from bookings is you just need to understand if you have a company where people work lots of different projects and they vary greatly week to week, then you definitely would probably want to steer away from pre-populating hours, because you're likely going to get rework and or incorrect time entries. Timesheet corrections. So there's a lot of options for timesheet corrections. You can, if you have permission, and it is a user-specific setting, it's not a role setting. So within a user's, you can allow them to be able to unapprove a timesheet. You can actually allow a user to recall a timesheet as well. If they submit a timesheet that and they realize they made a mistake or forgot something before it's approved, you can allow them to recall it, so to speak, which is really just self-rejecting the timesheet so they can make the change and resubmit it. But you can also unapprove it. Obviously, you can only unapprove it up to the point where any billing has been done. So once any hour on that timesheet has been run through a billing rule and charge created, that pretty much locks the timesheet, and you can no longer unapprove it without going in and deleting the charges which is the way us old folks at OpenAir remember those deep, dark days when we had to go in and delete charges just to free up a timesheet to make corrections. It was quite a bunch of effort. You can always do an overlapping timesheet. We've done that before, where you create an overlapping for the week. You can create negative and positive hours to correct the timesheet, and then submit that. It goes through a complete reapproval process for all the projects on the timesheet. So it's not ideal, but it is workable. And lastly, this was a game changer way back in the day when they came out with this adjustments of approved timesheets. The beauty here is you don't have to proxy in as the user. If you have the permissions in your role, you can just go into a timesheet, you can adjust it and make the changes need be, and off you go. And this was, like I said, a game changer from having to do either an overlapping or a non-approval. So like I mentioned, you have an approved timesheet that you can adjust. It is an internal switch. I'm sure everyone on this has that enabled. If you don't see it, check your admin, make sure your role is allowed to do it. You go in basically and you adjust, go into the edit mode, which you'll see you cannot change this timesheet, it's approved. You click the adjust option and it will open up the timesheet for editing. You make the changes and then you can save. It will create a secondary timesheet. And if you're moving hours from one project to another, it will automatically create reversing entries, and you'll have basically a net zero timesheet with positive and negative hours on the adjustment timesheet. It will be called out in the timesheet list view as adjusted. So the other good thing about this is it does not require approval. So generally we see someone on the accounting side or operational side having the responsibility for doing this adjustment. And then because it's adjustment generally to affect either costing on a project or billing, it does not require additional approval, and you can go in and make the change and then rerun your billing rules, and you will pick up the new hours you've moved, as well as you'll reverse the hours out from the project that was potentially chosen incorrect. So super cool, super easy, makes life a lot easy for, especially for T&M billing customers. So timesheet scripts. I remember the days when we used to deploy OpenAir and we never ever, we always deployed it out of the box. And then OpenAir came up with the ability to do customizations using their scripting engine. And pretty much ever since that, pretty much all of our customers have at least one script in their environment to help them automate something that would be otherwise manual. And so a few examples on the timesheet side that we've seen is a budget check. And so imagine you're submitting your time and the project manager has your time in their inbox. They want to go and look at it. But then they want to make sure you're not overspending on a task. So now they've got to go in, run reports, look at views, determine if your timesheet potentially is under the cap or not, under the planned hours, and then approve or reject based on what they find. Very manual, but very doable, just very manual. Most customers just allow you to go over the planned hours and then deal with it after the fact. Some customers want to be more proactive than that. And so what we've been asked to do is basically do a budget check script. So you submit your timesheet, it goes to a dummy approver. So this is a approver. It is a user license, but it's basically a gate where a scheduled script is running on all the timesheets in that dummy approver's queue. and it goes in and it does the validation on whether the hours entered on the timesheet fall under the planned hours for each task. If it does, it approves it, and then it goes to the actual project manager for review, and then it follows the normal process. If it doesn't, it will reject the timesheet and with a description of which tasks are over budget, and send that back to the user. The user will then have to pick a new task on their timesheet. So again, kind of a cool way to be able to have that automated check without the manual process. The other thing we've been asked to do is adding company holidays. So in the work schedule, companies will populate their holidays each year. And when you go to create a timesheet, when one of those holidays are within the timesheet period, you're not getting, it's not populating the hours and the holiday project like you would hope. It's just kind of designating that this is a day, an schedule exception day, and then you have to go and add the holiday and the hours for the holiday. Well, again, that's manual. We had some customers that wanted to automate that process, and so we've got a form script that we've done a few times now, where when the end user creates a timesheet in a week where there's a holiday, there's a quick validation that goes and checks to see if there's a holiday that week, and if there is, it comes back and auto adds the holiday project and the hours for that day to the timesheet. So kind of a cool little, again, automated workflow to kind of add to the end user experience for timesheets. In line with the budget check, just overall timesheet validation, some customers will want the end users to pick the service they're providing or the job code that they're performing, and that drives the billing. And so we've had customers ask us, could you do a validation to make sure that the service or job code that's selected is actually valid within the billing rules for the project. And so it follows the same path as the budget check. There's kind of a dummy approver sitting there. The script goes in, it looks at the timesheet, looks at the selections the end user made, it goes to the project and the billing rules, validates that the job code or service are valid. And if they are, it then approves them and sends it on through the next approval process. Otherwise, it will reject it and send back to the end user with description. So we can validate pretty much anything through that process, but it can be pretty handy if you're prone to errors and your end users are kind of responsible for their accuracy of their timesheets. And lastly, this is really not around timesheets, but more about time off. We've had customers that have a time off policy where they only allow users to take 4 or 8 hour increments. You can't go request PTO for 1 hour in those environments. And OpenAir doesn't have anything to automate that process or enforce that process. So what we've done in the past is, done a form script where if the end user puts in anything other than 4 or 8, it throws an error in the time off request process, and then forces the user to make the change and resubmit. So again, it's just a few examples of some of the scripting we've done that's affected the timesheet and the time off request process. So in summary, unfortunately, nothing we addressed today will impact the submission of timesheets on a timely pattern. Every customer struggles with getting timesheets in on time. And unfortunately, through scripting or through features and functions within OpenAir, we can only do so much. So yeah, it's a struggle for a lot of companies. And a lot of customers come up with creative ways to enforce that. But reporting and visibility of what is late, what is missing, and being able to have that information, and that's a big help. All right. Well, thank you for everyone. Again, my name is Ron. I'm the Top Step president and excited for you guys to join us today.